There are certain values and practices that withstand the test of time. As Goethe wrote, "He who cannot draw on 3,000 years is living hand to mouth." Timeless leadership connects the stories and experiences of modern leaders with lessons of the past that we know to be beautiful, useful, or true. Through the swirling maelstrom of change and uncertainty that perpetually threaten progress, our North Stars are character, culture, communication, and other timeless principles. This is where leaders learn. This is timeless leadership.
Hey, this is Scott. Welcome back to Timeless Leadership. First thing, I want to get this out of the way. I owe you a little bit of an apology. I've been absent here for longer than I intended. Life just got in the way. Things got busy work-wise, and the holidays came, and kids' commitments, and all the rest. But the good news is we're heading into 2025 with renewed vigor and additional conversations, and of course, continuing to talk about these timeless precepts of leadership that are important wherever you happen to come from and wherever you happen to land. And in this episode, it's a little bit different. I decided to take something that was recorded just recently and share it with you. The initial program was not for Timeless Leadership. It was for another show, and I'll explain exactly what that is. Meanwhile, just wanted to remind you that you can always reach me here by emailing me at timeless@scottmonty.com. Make sure you're signed up for the newsletter. We have gift subscriptions available if you'd like to surprise anyone for the holidays. I'll have a link to that in the show notes. And if you are a member of the academic community, that is, if you have an email address that ends in .edu, you are eligible for a special discount. You can receive Timeless and Timely, the newsletter, and all the associated publications for only $20 a year. And while I've got your attention, if you wouldn't mind dropping a rating into Apple Podcast or Spotify sometime over the holidays, that would be a lovely gift as well. It isn't often that I talk about myself, even in the shorter episodes here, where it's just me talking to you. It's not exactly what I'd call personal. And I realize that while I share bits of my career lessons and journey here and there, and I talk about one aspect or another of leadership, I haven't really shared my whole story with you. And it's probably because I'm less comfortable monologuing about myself. And because of that, it took someone else to get that story out of me. Now, I've been on a lot of podcasts over the years, but it wasn't until I sat down with Dan Horn and Rachel Pelagian from Frankly that it coalesced so perfectly. Frankly is the podcast from Franco, an integrated communications agency here in Detroit. And I'm grateful to their senior vice president, Nikki Little, for suggesting that I join them. Thanks to their insightful questions, I was able to share my journey and talk about my leadership philosophy in a meaningful way, how communication and culture and vision and authenticity, among other things, are essential for 21st century leadership. And as I listened to it, and I rarely listen to my own interviews, I realized that this is something I wanted to share with you. These are the things I work on with executives and their teams. And by all means, if these or other character strengths or something that you'd like to work on with your team, if any of that pops, drop me a note at coaching@scottmonty.com. I'm always open to having a conversation and exploring new opportunities regardless of the size of your company. So this is it. This is the final episode for 2025. I'll see you on the other side of the calendar with more timeless leadership. And now, with the permission of the Franco team, here's episode 59 of Frankly. Don't be afraid to write in the margins.
Hi, Scott. Welcome to Frankly.
Hi, Rachel. Hi, Dan. Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Welcome. Yeah.
I want to start with your career path. It's a very cool career path, I think. You've had some awesome experience that's led you to where you're at. So tell us in your words, I want to hear you talk about it, your background and career path that got you to your current role.
Well, it's anything but a straight line. I think this is something that maybe when I started out, I wasn't exactly sure where it was going to go, but I never predicted that it was going to be here. And to be truthful, I actually intended to be a doctor, a pediatrician, in fact. Yeah, I was pre-med as an undergrad. And as I was grappling for, just filling my class schedule, the standard advisor is like, well, you should be a bio or a chem major if you're pre-med. And I realized that, I'm going to get science up the wazoo for the rest of my academic career. And pre-med is just a concentration. It's not a major. So you can major in anything you want as long as you hit those prerequisite courses. And it was the first semester of my sophomore year, I took a class in Greek civilization, CL 101, Classics 101 with Steve Esposito. And Steve was a professor like I had never had before. He was just really down to earth and swore in class and just brought these ancient stories to life in a way that no one ever had for me before. Yeah. I thought, this is pretty cool, right? So I ended up choosing classics as a major because I could study history and drama and sports and architecture and all facets of human nature from the ancient times and see where their influences were today. So I ended up going to the first year of med school, decided that is not what I want to be doing. It was, I would have been a doctor if it wasn't for the science thing. Let's put it that way.
I feel that.
But I love the human interaction, right? Mm-hmm. Taking the history, getting to know people, understanding their motivations, et cetera. So I ended up turning that first year of medical school into a master's degree with a thesis, and I added an MBA on top of that with a concentration in healthcare administration. And this was back when, managed care was first a big thing, and it was uncertain where it was going to go. And I thought, well, if I'm in the business and I have a little bit of scientific knowledge, medical knowledge, as well as business knowledge, that might be a benefit. Well, you know what healthcare is like. Let's just say I got a big flat spot in the middle of my forehead from banging it against the wall so frequently. So I left there and went into consulting in biotech, medical device, and pharma. Okay. And helped early stage companies get financial and scientific partnerships to bring their technology to the market. And that was great until September 11th happened. And the deal-making market just completely imploded. And it was a small family-run consultancy, so they shut our division down. Yeah. From there, I went into advertising and marketing in healthcare and high tech, discovered digital communications, digital marketing, and what ended up becoming social media, and tried to convince the agency at the time that was going to be the future.
I need to know
the business model.
I need to know what year this was. I feel like this is important.
This was 2005.
Okay. So,
yeah.
And that's early stages of even
very early,
not even the traditional what we know today social media. So you were on to something.
That's exactly right. Back then, Facebook was only for people who were still in school. Right. You had to have an EDU email address at that point.
Yep.
And social media, as we then understood it, or Web 2.0, as we were calling it, was corporate blogs. Blogging was the big thing back then. And then ultimately YouTube. And then, you saw these other channels being added on. But the agency just didn't get it. They didn't understand what the business model was. And it really crystallized in a client conversation. This was probably 6 months into podcasting actually being a thing. And we had a client that wanted to do some thought leadership, but didn't want to do the standard white paper. Yeah. And I said, okay, well, how about hosting a podcast? You get to bring on interesting and intelligent people, talk with them about issues that are germane to your industry, and you look smart by virtue of having these other people on. You guys sensing a theme here?
Oh yeah.
It's a good strategy. Yeah. And the woman who was my client said, well, I'm not really sure about that. Do you have a case study you can show us? And I paused for a moment and I said, this whole phenomenon of podcasting is brand new. Do you want to read a case study, or do you want to be a case study?
Could be you, exactly.
Ooh, I love that way you just said that. Do you want to read it or be it?
And she goes, I want to read a case study.
Yeah. It was a great concept, though. I'll give you that.
Yeah, well, it took a few years to be proven out. But so I left that agency, went to work for a strategic consultancy that just did social media strategy for big brands. Okay. And then I got a tap on the shoulder from Ford Motor Company. We are creating this new executive position to lead social media and digital communications globally. Won't you come out to Dearborn and have a look, kick the tires, so to speak? And I was back in Boston, and I really had no inkling of what life in Detroit was like. Sure. Had no interest in coming out here. There was nothing pulling me out here.
Right.
And after some contracted negotiations, eventually I came out for an interview, and I was blown away by the people, the company, and the general sense that I got walking in the door there. There was something special going on at Ford Motor Company in 2008. Mm-hmm. Right. That's when I was brought out here. And I joined in July of 2008. And the carpocalypse started about 10 days after I started.
Yeah.
And I held on for dear life. We had a great team. We had a great plan. We communicated clearly, and we just led the way. And I was there for 6 years and really paving the road behind us in what we did in social media at Ford. Yeah. I left there and hung out my own shingle to do communications consulting. And ultimately, that has turned in the last couple of years into leadership consulting and coaching. Because fundamentally, leadership is about communication. But more and more what I've learned, working with fantastic leaders along the way, is that there are certain human traits, certain pieces of human nature that are constant, and that we look for in leaders. And I go all the way back now to my beginnings in classics, and I realize if I had only paid more attention in classes back then, I could have been far ahead of the curve than I find myself today.
Yeah. It's such an interesting point that you make, because what you were really interested in was classics, but it's really psychology, right? It's the human psychology of why we do the things that we do, why we make the choices that we make, why we communicate in the way that we do, and how each person is different. Things are innate, some things aren't innate, right? Like, you're comparing it to classics, but it really, it comes down to that psychology. And I think as communicators, we all have a fascination with psychology at a basic level, because you communicate in a certain way because you understand the psychology of your audiences, right?
Well, that's exactly right, Rachel. And it's part psychology, it's part sociology, it's part history, it's part literature, right? But if you pick apart any of these things, you end up seeing patterns and trends, and you understand, particularly when you've seen something play out before. Might not be exactly the same. It's certainly not the same technology today as it was 200 or 2,000 years ago. But that human interaction is the same. And if you understand that from a fundamental level, you know what? You can actually predict the future by understanding the past.
And you can prove it now with data. Right. So now we now we get to implement these things because we understand it, and then say, look, it worked, or hey, this didn't work, because you can back it with that technology. Right. So it's that evolution of how we've gotten here that makes us even smarter in communications and marketing. So
now today with Timeless Leadership, talk a little bit about what your role looks like, because I think there's still elements of communications in there, but there's more than that, right? In your current role.
There is. I mean, when clients hire me, there's a few reasons they want to hire me. One, they don't feel like they've got cohesion between their executive team, right? Some people are off doing one thing, others are doing another. They don't feel like their vision is necessarily being communicated well. And it really comes down to whether they have a vision or not, right? So that's the first thing I look at with them is what is your vision for where you and your team are going together. Because if people don't understand where they need to go, they're not going to understand what they need to do to get there. It's as simple as that. And when you have a vision, it's not, we're going to do this and this and this. Those are goals, right? Those are tactics along the way. A vision is something that's aspirational. It's something that maybe you'll never quite achieve. You'll always be grasping for it, but it's something that everybody can understand and can move in the same direction and is motivated to get there. So, for example, when I was at Ford, the one Ford vision that we had was an exciting and viable Ford delivering profitable growth for all. Okay, well, who doesn't want to be profitable, right? And everybody wants to succeed. So it's not like, well, it's just going to make management the profit. It's about spreading it around to everyone, right? And everybody can get behind that. So having that vision is a real first step. The other is making sure that there's a consistent culture that everybody is experiencing. And culture is merely a matter of doing what you say you're going to do, living up to your values that you've stated, and acting in a certain way, and telling stories over and over again about what it is that you stand for, what it is that you're doing, what it is that you're helping other people to do, right? And that is a leader's job, is to be the chief communicator for the whole company. If you're the CEO, 50% of your job should be communication.
Yeah,
100%. Well, I said 50%, but I mean, I 100% believe that your 50% of your job should be communication, and you're helping other people to take that message and communicate it to their teams as well. Which is why it's essential that vision and all of those values that you talk about need to be easy to understand and easily repeatable.
And the culture is the buy-in, right? If you think about it, your leadership, the culture is creating these, like the vision and communicating it, but getting their buy-in so that they communicate it in the right way too. Because if they don't buy in, you're going to hard stop, never get it past your leadership team, right? That's
exactly right. Exactly right. And you can tell when people are bought in and when they're not. And if they're not, you know what? That's okay. It doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means maybe they're not a fit for the organization.
Yeah.
And ultimately, when you attach all of that to accountability, right? One of the things I do is I've adapted Alan Mullally's working together philosophy. It's a working together leadership and management system. And I help clients every week with a review of their business plan. And every single member of the executive team has to be accountable. They have to be transparent about what they've accomplished and what they haven't. Right, where things aren't going so well. And in my experience, people are all too willing to kind of sweep under the rug the stuff that isn't going so well. And bottom line is, if you can't talk about that, then you're never going to be able to fix it. Right? So holding people accountable for the things they've said they're going to do, which again gets back to that character and culture that we're trying to build, and helping them to deliver on those promises to each other, to their employees, and to customers, then it all starts working together. So it's more than just setting a culture, and it's more than just having a weekly set of meetings. It's about melding the two and people fundamentally understanding what they're buying into.
Yeah, and I think so much of that starts at that top level, that executive leadership level, because you can, if 50% of the job is communication, which I, totally agree with, there's another big chunk of that, which is, walking the talk, action behind the words that you're trying to spread throughout in an organization, right? If you don't see that culture from the top down, it's so hard to communicate and enforce and build around that so that, the whole organization works towards the same.
Yeah. And ultimately that really comes down to honesty and trust and integrity.
Yeah.
These are kind of like the backbones of character and character development. And if you break trust with people, then they're not going to be as willing to go on this journey with you. If you don't tell them the truth and they find out, from a third party or, in some other way that you've lied to them, well, it just gets at the core of what trust is, and you have no integrity after that. And those are the kinds of leaders that people like, the ones that are trustworthy and honest and filled with integrity. And I think we need more leaders like that today, more than ever before. And yeah, it's important to focus on deliverables and profitability and the numbers, but it's also important to feed your souls and to understand that without character, all you've got is a money-making machine.
Yeah.
Without culture, all you've got is an assembled group of people who are contributing to someone else's wealth, not their own.
Right.
And it gets down to, what's inside of you and how you actually share that with the world.
I was just going to say, as humans, I don't think we trust people that are always perfect, right?
Yeah.
We know that humans shouldn't be perfect all the time. So if there's always this facade or this culture of we only talk about the good things, we can't discuss the bad, we always have to be moving in this one direction, you're not going to find people that are actually committed to you or want to listen to you, because we know that's not realistic. And if you want to get that from people, you've got to display that first, right? I mean, that goes back to your trust and integrity. But as a leader, it doesn't mean being perfect all the time. I think, in fact, it means mainly the opposite, that you can admit when you're wrong and look to how to fix it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, ironically, this is the Instagramification of leadership, where everything has to be picture perfect, right? And you've got all these influencers on Instagram that look like they're living the best lives.
Right.
And you peel back a few layers, and in some cases you find out, well, that's not actually the case, right? And there's a lot of smoke and mirrors and filters that go into making them look as good as they do. And you make a great point, Rachel, that the notion of vulnerability has been avoided for so many years from leadership. We expect them to be tough. We see so much celebration of, alpha males and winning is everything. Well, we can't all win all the time. Right. And life is filled with failures as well as successes. And those who are strong enough to be able to admit failure, and obviously to learn from their mistakes, but to help others learn from those mistakes as well. This is one of the things I do in my newsletter, Timeless and Timely. Looking back at history, I look at failures of leaders who haven't done so well as leaders who have succeeded, because you want the negative examples as well as the positive examples. And the reality is, it takes great strength to be vulnerable, to show your weakness. And it's kind of an irony play right there. But those who are able to show where they're weak, where they've needed help from others, and what they've done to seek that help and to improve, they can help other people do the same thing as well. So
in your work with leaders, with executives, trying to help them kind of find this, what are some tips that you give to maybe some of your clients, without revealing everything here, but what are some of the tips that you would generally give leaders who are trying to seek that ability to be more vulnerable and to kind of tap into that?
Well, ultimately, it comes down to their employees wanting to see them as real human beings, as more than just the boss. I think what we've seen over the past 4 years or so coming out of the pandemic is we've seen one of the things, interestingly, that we tried to do at Ford is we've seen more humanization, right? We've taken down this mask that we must always be on, we must always be correct, we must always succeed, to, hey, I'm struggling here. You know, I'm just a human. I'm trying to look after a couple of kids and elderly parents at the same time, and the sandwich generation for a lot of people. I'm trying to keep medical appointments and attend play recitals and hockey games for my kids and all kinds of stuff that is just life, right? And this idea that you have work-life balance, what it really is this work-life integration. And I have seen so many examples of leaders who have struggled with something as simple as authenticity. How do I be authentic? Well, and for me, it was never a big deal. It was like, well, I just am who I am.
You just live.
You know? Right. But so many leaders in particular have been like the office person and then the home person. And those are two very different personalities. And I work with my clients to help them just live their lives with their employees and to, quite frankly, start with love. Show your employees you care about them. Love them up, as Alan Mullally used to say to us at Ford. That's the first step, right? Because if they understand that you care about them and how they are as human beings, then they're going to function really well as employees too. It's not about just cracking a whip on them all the time. Yeah. So I think just starting with that human element first is extremely liberating and helping them to understand that they don't have to be this suit of armor all the time.
Yeah, and that's so impressive in a company like Ford, where you have, how many thousands and thousands of people around the globe to have that, singular leader. Obviously, there's a leadership team, but to have that singular leader feel a connection with each employee throughout, the globe. That's such a big undertaking, and I have to imagine just one of the toughest things to learn how to do as a leader at that level.
Well, it really has to come from within.
Yeah.
And when it looks like you're just following a scripted pattern or a program, people are going to feel the disingenuousness of it. And again, it's like honesty and trust and integrity that I mentioned before. When people feel like you're trying to pull the wool over their eyes, where you're trying to make it seem like you're something that you're not, well, they're going to sniff through that, and then that's going to harm you doubly, because not only are you not that, but they're going to see that you're a fraud. Right. And if you can't affect that kind of empathy and compassion and concern about other people, well, okay. And again, that's you. Doesn't make you a bad person, just maybe not a fit for the organization.
Right.
And maybe you are a fit for the organization. Maybe an organization doesn't care about having those soft skills that I just talked about.
True.
Whatever it is, but it's about being consistent with that culture that you're expected to be in.
Yeah, and I think there's so many parallels here that you can draw between that type of leadership authenticity and what we see in communications or marketing now. I think there's a lot more, outside of the company interest or want among consumers to see an authentic face of a brand rather than, obviously your brand is important all the time, but to have an executive who can speak, or to have a conversation with a representative who knows what they're talking about, to have more this face of the brand and put a personality behind that. I think we see so much more of that in communications now also, where it's just people are craving that. They don't want the, you lose that credibility quickly, I guess, on that front as well.
They know that brands are, marketing itself is a lot of smoke and mirrors, right? I mean, you hear that being picked apart a lot recently, and you've used the term smoke and mirrors for leadership, right? Mm-hmm. It's exhausting as a person to put on two different sides of you, right? You're going to burn out a lot faster. Marketing's the same way. You're going to burn your audience out real fast if you're just constantly trying to put on this brand facade of who you are, when behind the scenes there's a lot more going on, right? There really is, you're right, Dan, a lot of parallels there. Yeah. And that's why you see so many
what's
faces.
Interesting is when I first got to Ford, as I said, I was thrown into this carpocalypse. Ford and GM and then Chrysler in the fall of 2008 were hauled down in front of Congress because the whole bailout hearings were going on. Now, Ford didn't need to be there for the money, but we were there to support the industry. And Ford at the time did not have a Twitter account. We couldn't get a hold of the Ford handle. And I already had a modest Twitter following. So I just basically got on my own handle as a representative of Ford and talked with people. And we continued to take that kind of approach with a website we put up as we needed to tell the Ford story. And that was the name of the website, the Ford Story. And we did videos of our executives. And then I did the first ever Twitter Q&A with a CEO. Was with Alan Mullally. Okay. And at every turn, what we did was we tried to humanize Ford and to put real people in touch with consumers. And Alan saw it in an instant. He knew exactly how this was working. And the beauty of it was consistent with Ford's culture and its history, because guess what? Henry Ford, who founded the company, was synonymous with it for its first 40 years, and the Ford family still owns the company and runs the company, and their name is on the logo. Yeah. So of all the auto companies, it was the most human, and we actually brought that to light in 2008. Right, and here we are in 2024 now talking about the importance of humanization in communications and marketing. So it's all cyclical.
I would love to have you talk a little bit about your experience across agency, corporate, consulting, right? You've touched the industry in a lot of different ways and from a lot of different positions. What did you like about each? What did you dislike? Just give us a little bit of the background and from your career, how you liked each.
Well, I think you heard some of my frustrations about agency life already.
Yeah. Although, what a weird time to be an agency, right? Like, I wonder if it was you were trying to innovate and agency was saying no. I feel like now there's a lot of innovation in agency and corporate sometimes, depending on who they hire, can be a little slower. It's just an interesting difference.
Yeah. There's always a back and forth like that. We had this shift, I don't know, maybe about 8 or 10 years ago, where content teams were brought in-house from agencies to in-house at clients. And now clients are trying to cut back. So guess what? the pendulum's swinging the other way. So it's all the same kind of things just happening in different under different roofs. On the corporate side, I really enjoyed having the freedom to experiment, at least in my position. We were given great license to go out and try new things. We paved the road behind us. And we didn't look to other companies in our industry. We looked at best practices across all industries and got inspiration from all of them, which was interesting because when Henry Ford did the moving assembly line, he didn't look at automotive. He looked at textile manufacturers and he looked at meat packing plants, and he kind of put those ideas together and goes, this would work for auto and we can do it this way. That's exactly what we did when we were trying to innovate at Ford. So working with some of the most creative and talented people, both on the agency and client side while I was at Ford, was so gratifying. It was something that, because all of these people were pulling together in the same direction toward that vision, we just had a great time doing it. It was a lot of hard work. Obviously, it was, you're almost on 24/7, which was exhausting. I don't miss that part at all. But just gratifying that we could make that kind of a difference in people's lives. And, moving to consulting and coaching now, I feel like I'm at a time in my life where I've learned so much and I want to give back. I want to be able to share what I've learned and to teach other people. And every newsletter I end with the same phrase, and that is, there's so much to learn. And I truly believe that there is. I am a student for life. I enjoyed my time in the academic world, but I believe that leadership is about being a lifelong learner. And when you're a lifelong learner, I think you have a responsibility as far as a leader to be a lifelong teacher as well. And so for me, being able to impart knowledge, whether I'm discovering it this week or whether I discovered it 20 years ago, being able to share those stories and help other people along and kind of not pull the ladder up behind me, but send it down, send the elevator back down to help other people come back up.
And sharing that knowledge, you've mentioned your newsletter. You also have the Timeless Leadership podcast as well as some others. So I guess a question for you on that, this is inherently a method of sharing knowledge, of gaining knowledge from the people that you speak with. What was your goal when you first started out with a podcast or with a newsletter, and how has that maybe shifted a little bit over the years? Is there anything that's surprised you that you've gotten out of that you didn't expect?
So I started my newsletter probably back in the early 2010s, I want to say.
Okay.
I've been blogging forever, but I started a weekly newsletter I think it was called This Week in Social Media.
Okay.
And then I changed it to This Week in Digital. And I had like 8 different sections where I looked at, regulatory developments and changes in the media landscape and marketing and communications and strategy. And it was a lot for a single person to undertake. At the recommendation of a reader, I actually changed the name of that to The Full Monty, because there was so much that was involved in it. But I realized as email newsletters became more of a thing and caught up with this trend that I had identified years before, there were whole armies of people that were putting out daily newsletters like this, not even weekly. And I was like, I can't compete with that. Yeah. And while it was professionally enriching to be able to stay up to speed with what was going on, it was exhausting at the same time. So I decided to turn to what I had been doing. Is I did a couple of paragraphs at the top of every newsletter. That was just kind of like a personal essay. And I really enjoyed that part. And I got more comments from people on the essay than I did on the 80 some odd links that I put in the newsletter. And I go, that's where the value is, right? Yeah. And that eventually turned into Timeless and Timely, where I realized, okay, I'm talking about things that are relevant today, but we've seen years before. And there's, thousands and thousands of stories like this that I can pull on. And it actually fits more with where I want to go with my consulting practice, which is helping people understand what motivates leaders and how you build cultures and how you do storytelling and all the rest. So it just kind of naturally evolved over time. But that consistency, that weekly consistency, knowing, people knowing what they will expect, what they'll get every week. And the topic's going to surprise them, or, maybe my writing style horrifies them. I don't know, but,
they're signed up either way. So.
Right. Well, right. But I try to keep them engaged and signed up and give them something of value that they can pass on to somebody else in their life as well.
Yeah. I like thinking about that as like topic starters or thought starters, right? It's things that interest you, and using that as, if you put it out each week, thinking like maybe someone will go into a conversation and have something new and interesting to talk about this week because of, what I've taught them. If you think about being like a lifelong learner and teacher, I think that's like a great point. And a reason to sign up for newsletters, something I hadn't thought about reading. It's a lot of the times nowadays it's like, hey, did you see this TikTok on this? Right? Like that's how I tend to start a lot of things, which I would be really interested in, like you being at the dawn of social media. What are your thoughts on like social media today and TikTok and the brands and the way that we're using these platforms?
All I can say is I'm sorry.
I'm not. Listen, I'll tell you what about TikTok. It can say what you will, but I laugh, I cry, and I learn a lot. Do I also have my brain rotted out sometimes? Sure. But there is, if you talk about like marketing communications content, like far and wide, I mean, I've found so much stuff on TikTok. Yeah, go validate it, of course, but it's I think it's a really, if used right, it's a good platform.
Well, look, every form of media has its value.
Yes.
You know, you need to know how to apply it.
Yeah.
And how to apply yourself.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's so easy, Rachel, to get sucked into that rabbit hole and to just constantly scroll through.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you're probably going to develop early onset arthritis. In your thumb.
I know. My husband already is. He's already got like carpal tunnel. I'm like, you work in medicine. This is crazy. He's like, I think it's the phone. I think it's. I'm like, oh no, we're doomed. We're so doomed.
Well, I don't think there's any substitute for cracking open a good book. There are so many stories that are. And not just literature, but, you know, in history, there's so many instances of, like I said, things that we can learn from today that are still relevant today that maybe nobody's talked about. And this is the thing, when I saw this shift at the agency, when I was working at Ford, I saw new talent come in to start working with us. They come in thinking that they've discovered fire because have we considered a blog? There's this thing called blogging, and I'm like, yeah, I think we know about blogging.
Yeah, right.
And I think there's a cultural history that we as communicators and marketers are responsible for sharing. We need to tell our own stories and our own history to help the next generation understand how we got to where we are today. Right. And I've said this for at least a decade and a half, that if you look at the evolution of media, when radio first started, there were commercials. That's how we got soap operas. It was soap companies that actually sponsored a lot of these radio dramas. Well, when television came along, they just did radio with pictures. And so the advertising just was, okay, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to actually put a camera on people. And then the internet came along. It's like, well, we know that works. We know video advertising works. We know billboards work. Let's just slap those on the internet. Right. So it's the same thing over and over and over again. And I can tell you that as we're looking at Threads, and I don't know where Blue Sky is going, but these are platforms that in some shape or form are going to need to be supported. And if it's not through advertising, then it's, maybe a subscription model on Blue Sky. But I can tell you that if Threads goes the way of Instagram, you're going to see a lot of ads.
Yeah. Yep.
So, be ready for it. That's whatever medium is right for you. Just know what its limitations are and know what its strengths are and use it to that effect.
Well, and there's something for everyone, right? Like Substack right now blowing up with the subscription model. And I was just watching a TikTok last night, but it's this girl she's a recipe blogger. And so people are saying, how do you make your money? People are mad that they're all moving to Substack. You're having to pay for recipes. And she said, it's either that or you're mad that you come to my blog and have to scroll through 17 ads to get to the recipe, right? But she's like, but everyone's everyone's, it's the end user making the choice of what they would like to pay for or what their experience is. And so we're in this age where you can almost have both right now and start to see which one as a consumer you like better, but someone does have to get paid for creating the content, right? I mean, that's going to remain the same. No matter.
But if anything, I think the Nobel Prize I don't know if it's the Peace Prize or the Nobel Prize in economics should go to the guy that invented the jump to recipe button.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
You're
that
so
is
right.
A revelation.
I love that. That's great.
Well, I know we're coming up on time here, but we've got one more question that we like to ask, just kind of close things out in the interest of lifelong learning and teaching. If you could give your 21-year-old self one bit of advice from your career that you've learned, what would you go back and say there?
Oh boy, there's so much.
Loaded question.
Just on the when I think about consuming knowledge, I would tell my 21-year-old self, don't be afraid to write in the margins. And that's both literal and metaphorical, right? I've always viewed books as these almost sacred objects They were meant to be handled delicately and read and put back on a shelf. And what I realized over time is books are just another form of media, and you can interact with them. And writing down your thoughts in the margins, and you go back to a book after a number of years, and you can see what you had said about it then. And I'll bet you have a different approach to things years later. Clifton Fadiman said, when you reread a classic, you don't see more in the book than you saw before. You see more in yourself than you saw before. And I think that is so powerful as you reflect on instances in your life, and whether it's, notes you're taking in a meeting, or reflecting on an interaction you had with a colleague afterwards, writing something down and spending time reflecting on it. And with your thoughts, not being afraid to be quiet with your thoughts, right? That's the temptation of social media, whether it's TikTok or Instagram, is to keep our mind occupied. We need more quiet time. We need more time in the margins with ourselves and with each other.
I like that's very profound and not something we've heard before. No. I almost feel like a good action of that, if we're looking, it's December, we're coming up on the end of a year, and people might not like, New Year's resolutions, whatever, but maybe it's a good time to sit down, you said quiet time, reflect on the year you've had, what you think you've accomplished, maybe what you would like to accomplish next year. Just evaluate it, right? Look at it from a bird's eye view, and then come back to it at the end of next year and look at it and see how you feel about that then, right? And maybe do it again for that year. But be quiet, sit down, look at your year yourself, and just kind of evaluate it. Write in the margins, and then next year you can write in those margins again. I like that.
There you go.
It's beautiful. Well, Scott, thank you so much for your time and knowledge. I feel like I've learned a lot.
Yeah,
I mean, there's always something to learn, and we did it today. So thank you for spending the time. We appreciate it. You're
very welcome, and thank you for having me. So what did you think? Did anything stand out to you? Did anything particularly surprise you? Drop me a note at timeless@scottmonty.com and let me know. Be delighted to hear from you. Please take a moment to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and share it around. In doing so, you can help the next generation of leaders on their journey. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Our theme music, Timeless Harmony, used with permission, was written by Matthias Leon and performed by the City of Prague Philharmonic Orchestra. I'm Scott Monty. There's so much to learn.